Generative AI, right, tools obviously have been having their moment. They've been the source of some controversy, though, in the context of software development, in particular, obviously, open source license compliance as well. One of the reasons why is that generative AI is trained on open source libraries. So there's an argument that anything created with generative AI would constitute a derivative work of the libraries upon which the tool is trained. And such would have to comply to things like copyleft licenses. So what's your kind of view on this, Heather?
Well, so this is obviously a hot topic and also a topic where the law is a little bit vague. And I'll tell you what I think of it, but I want to emphasize that other people might differ on where they come out on this. So I think that the claims that generative AI will create derivative works of the source code that it's trained on mainly misunderstand what machine learning is. Machine learning sucks up a lot of data, and then it creates a model, which is basically a kind of an array of probabilities. So, for instance, everybody's used predictive typing on, say, Gmail or something, and you say, like you get an email from somebody and it suggests, thanks for your message, or that sounds fine, or something like that. So what's happening there is that based on what you start writing, or maybe based on the context, the tool is suggesting what it thinks will come next. And that's basically what machine learning is. It's saying, if this thing happens, then this thing is probably going to happen. But that's not the same as saying, well, I've copied this stuff. When you look at copyright law principles, actually, if something just generically happens after something else, then there's no copyright protection of that, because it's not a creative process at all. Moreover, a lot of it is going to be very short stuff, a word, a phrase, a line of code, and there are limitations to copyright doctrines actually that apply to small bits of things that might otherwise be copyrightable works. And then finally, there's, I think, a very good argument that it's fair use. So even if you are actually copying, it falls under the fair use doctrine, which is way too complicated to talk about in the time we have. Where I come down on it is that if machine learning models are properly prepared, they should not create infringing output, because that's just not what they do. They don't copy paste. That's what humans do. Like what ML models do is they say, okay, if this thing comes here, then this thing is going to come next. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but fundamentally, the output should not be infringing. And so it actually shouldn't matter what licenses are on the input side at all. Now, there is a lawsuit pending. It's class action about GitHub Copilot. And interestingly, that is not a copyright infringement suit. And if we sort of ask why, didn't it allege copyright infringement? It alleged all sorts of other stuff, but not copyright infringement. And reading between the lines, I think even the people who filed that lawsuit, realized that they would never win the copyright infringement claim. So, I think largely generative AI should not be infringing if it's done correctly, if it's trained on a big enough data set. Obviously, if you train on too small a data set, yeah, you're going to get a lot of like copying of stuff, but that's because you didn't train it properly. So what I tell my clients at this point is, this is a risk analysis question. These tools are reportedly unbelievably helpful, like with productivity boosts of 50% or more. You can't ignore that, right?
Right.
And so what you're doing is you're weighing against the risk that the code you're generated is going to be infringing. And what I would say about that is that it's probably not going to be infringing, number one. Number two, the defendant in that case happens to have an enormous war chest to defend the case. Thank goodness for all of us, because a smaller company might not have had the resources, and they might have settled or capitulated and created a precedent that would be actually dangerous for everyone else.
Absolutely.
So good on the big companies who are willing to fight to death over these copyright issues, because they're the ones who have the resources to do it. And finally, in the worst case scenario where you end up with a code base that is riddled with third-party open source stuff, there is a way to fix that. We actually fix that stuff all the time.
Nice.
Because of that, I say go ahead and use the tools and let the chips fall where they may. There are other kinds of generative AI, by the way, that I have kind of slightly different advice on, but that's kind of my thought about it right now. And it's a very controversial question.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, the technology is obviously outpacing the law at this time, and thus that is creating a lot of gray areas. I'm curious, just to kind of wrap up this question on, do you have any guidance, or do you think that there should be any guidance? Kind of listening to your answer, I almost kind of get the sense that your take is, hey, flag that particular application is using generative AI, and then just let them, kind of run with it and enjoy themselves.
Well, that's a very good comment, actually. So what I recommend at this, and by the way, this is very similar to what happened with open source 20 years ago. Like open source 20 years ago, lawyers were saying, don't use open source, it's too risky. And in fact, if you said that, the engineers would use it anyway. This is exactly the same. All of your people are using generative AI, and the only question is whether they're doing it or not. So
Right.
if you're going to develop guidelines, you better develop guidelines that don't tell them just, oh, don't use this stuff, and they'll get left in the dust, right? So my advice to clients about this is, like for Copilot, I would say go ahead and use it. Worst case scenario, we go and remediate everything, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
For things like art, I would say use generative AI, but make sure that you can track what you produced using it. Because artwork and music and things like that, those are discrete files. So if they were a problem, you could swap them out, right? But then you have to track what you created using the tools. And then things like ChatGPT for marketing materials and stuff like that. My general thought is that stuff's pretty generic, and I can't really see a lot of copyright liability for it. But also, like those tools are best used as tools for humans, not as substitutes for humans.
Absolutely.
So like ChatGPT is, for instance, great to write a first draft of something, but it's not terribly good to write the final draft of it,
Exactly.
right? And so if you exercise your own judgment and creativity, and you use these things as tools, then you're actually also reducing the copyright liability.